Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming along to the Trees and Design Action Group meeting on resilience to tree pests and diseases. This is a TDAG seminar. They run every 2 months. We are a network and a forum that brings together people and organisations to support the role of urban trees through better collaboration in the planning, design, construction, maintenance of our urban spaces. Evidence-based information is really important to us. So if you have a question or an idea or any information, this is the forum to share it with us. We'd like to thank our partners for this particular event, who are the Arboretum Association, the Institute of Chartered Foresters, and the Landscape Institute. It feels a little bit like deja vu, but I would like to introduce our host for today, Tony Kirkham, former head of Arboretum Gardens and Horticultural Services at the Royal Botanic Garden, Kew, and General All-Star Tree Great. Over to you, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you to TDAG again for putting these seminars on. They are really important. They cover extremely topical issues that we're all faced with, and they're very, very popular. I think we've got over 300 people signed up for this one, so it shows how important and how significant this one is. It's the seminar is resilience to pests and diseases, and I think for anyone in the tree world, horticultural world, never has this been so more so important. With tree selection, tree planting, and management of tree collections, we're all faced with climatic change and the increase of pests and diseases, exotic pests and diseases, that I suppose are influenced by climate change and freer movement and people wanting to plant more different species of trees, more interesting selections, etc. And of course, that increases the risk of bringing in pests and diseases from the continent, from overseas, and introducing them to our treescape. I remember in 1977, I was at Maris Wood and doing the NCH Arboriculture. One of the topics was pests and diseases, and we were going through sort of pests and diseases that were present in the UK at that time, and the main one was Dutch elm disease. And I just thought, we had to learn the life cycle off parrot fashion, and it was guaranteed to come up in an exam question. So, we really wanted to learn this. But I just thought at the time, I was young, starting out in forestry and arboriculture, and I just thought, well, we'll get the elms out of the way and we can crack on. Little did I realize how the increase and introduction of pests and diseases would increase. Well, I'll not say tenfold, but hugely. And I remember a graph being shown by one of the forest researchers at Alice Holt. This graph ran along horizontal along the bottom, showing Dutch elm disease, and then suddenly started to climb vertical. And here we are in 2025, and that graph's going vertical now, rather than horizontal. So it's an extremely important subject, and we have 4 really good, interesting presentations to hear today that I'm sure we will all glean information that will help us in our everyday work. So that's all from me. The sessions are 15 minutes, apart from the last one, which is 20 minutes. And we're going to keep strictly to time because I know how busy everyone is. So I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Debbie Hemming, who is a scientific manager of vegetation climate interactions team at the Met Office. And she'll talk about the impact of weather and climate on pests and diseases. Over to you, Debbie.
Thank you. Thanks, Tony. And thanks very much to TDAG for inviting me. I just wanted to highlight here all the people that we've worked with in my team on pests and diseases and the relationships with mostly climate, but weather and climate are so very much the same, just a slightly different time scale and spatial scale. So on the right here are a list of all the icons of the different groups we've worked with. Since about 2015, we've been working on plant pests and diseases and pathogens. So today I'm just going to give a really short overview of introduction to climate and plant pests and pathogens, a little bit about microclimates and how important they are for understanding and estimating pest and pathogen risk, and then a little bit about urban environments and managing pest pathogen risk, but I think that's going to be something others will talk about better. So I did just want to say that particularly for insect pests, which are well, many animal pests are, really the pests are only, or the detrimental side of insects are only about less than 1% of all of the insect species. There's about 5.5 million species of insects. And so they get a bad press, but really insects do a huge benefit for us on the whole. So I didn't want people coming away thinking insects are just bad, because obviously they're really not. So the role of climate on plant biosecurity, and biosecurity is how we manage the risks from pests and pathogens. If you look at the top left figure, that shows the cumulative increase in new pests and pathogen outbreaks in the UK that are affecting trees. And similar outbreaks for other plants and crops, for example, have been noticed. And that's since 1971. And that line is continuing to increase. This was from the Forestry Commission data, but other data sources have also shown this. It's very robust. And it's thought to be mostly related to the increase in trade and travel, but also there's a factor of climate and climate change in that increase. So similar things have been observed across most of the globe. In Europe here, if you look at the bottom left, tree mortality in the Alps, particularly from bark beetles, has been partly driven by windstorms, so another factor of climate, not just temperature. And this facilitates bark beetle infestations. So there was a really good FAO report, which is shown in the middle here, which was a scientific review of the impact of climate change on plant pests. So it's very good, very easy reading. So I definitely recommend that to anyone. And within that report, the Director General of the FAO said the review clearly shows that the impact of climate change is one of the greatest challenges the plant health community is facing, and this is globally. And Dominic Eyre from DEFRA's plant health team, who we work a lot with, said that understanding the relationship between pest biology and climate is crucial for determining current and future risks to inform pest management. So again, this is further evidence from the UK Climate Change Risk Assessment, CCRA3 in 2021, that shows the change through time of, in this case, invasive non-native species, or INNS, in different habitats, so freshwater, marine and terrestrial. So you can see generally, particularly terrestrial, is showing a rise in these invasive non-native species. So these could be pests and pathogens, but also other invasive species. So how does climate affect insects in this case? But there's a lot of interactions between climate and pathogens and other pests as well. So if we look on the left here, under a gradual long-term warming, for example, climate change or change in the long-term trends of seasonality, the impact on in this case insects could be changes in range shifts, so quite slow progressions, changes in the phenology, the timing of the seasons, and the interactions between different species. If you look at extreme events, moving down to the yellow, such as extreme rainfall, extreme temperatures, extreme hot or extreme cold, or fire or drought, these can affect particularly the fitness of the insects or the pathogens that survive on them. It could also affect the food sources and their fertility particularly. And where you get interactions between these events, or concomitant or sequential extreme events, this can also have a big effect on species decline or extinctions. The line at the bottom just shows management, and there's a big factor here that can affect the survival and the persistence of insects. And so there's a lot of management potential for insects and pests and pathogens. Just wanted to highlight that these are really complex socio-ecological systems. So this is what's called the pest triangle. So in order to have an outbreak, you need to have obviously your pest and the environment that pest lives within. It needs to be quite suitable. And then the host, or the plant in this case, that the pest is feeding on. So all of these need to be in place. And these are all affected by many different factors, such as management, land use change, pollution, microclimate, and specific events and human developments. So it really gets complex, and all these interactions are very difficult and very challenging to model and also therefore to manage. One of the ways that we do model the interactions between climate and pests and pathogens is by conducting laboratory or field experiments with that pest or pathogen. So on the left here, this is some work by Ma et al. In 2021 focused on the diamondback moth, which you see in the top right corner here. And so the graph shows on the vertical axis the survival in the lab experiment, where they change the temperatures and see how many survive. And on the bottom, it shows the number of low temperature degree days in this case. So it's the number of days below a certain temperature at which the diamondback moth survives. So you can see as the number of low temperature days increases, less of the pests survive, and it's kind of an exponential inverse curve. And on the right here, the graph shows the observed survival in percentage, and this is from field observations against a modeled predicted survival from an estimate model. And so you can see this is a very typical way at which pests and pathogens are modeled. So we've done some work using these very simple kind of degree day relationships that are in the literature and available through expert consultation as well. So we've used these to estimate the timing during the season at which different events for different pests will occur or are likely to occur. So in this case, I'm just showing, this is what we've been producing, our UK climate pest risk web tool. And the link is on the bottom there if you want to have a play with it. And I'm just showing here the estimates for Asian longhorn beetle 10% adult emergence for a specific year. You can choose the year. And this is linked to the climate of that particular year, and that's shown on the right on the middle graph, or the top graph here. On the bottom is the accumulated degree days for that graph. You can click around at different regions and get an estimate of what the emergence timing might be for that particular year and location. Obviously, the uncertainties are huge on this, so it's not shown on the map, but when we discuss the results with users, we talk about what the range of uncertainties could be, and we do additional analysis to help with that. So we've also done another decision support tool for very similar for Phytophthora ramorum and Phytophthora pluvialis, which are two of the Phytophthora species, pathogen species in the UK at the moment. So you can see here, this is showing Phytophthora particularly, the climate that is very moist and wet and high rainfall is particularly suitable for Phytophthora. So you can see in the western coast and in the higher areas. So that's for 2017, which was a wet spring. So it's quite high values on the west coast there. And if we go to 2021, which was a dry spring, you can see the days in this case with suitable climate is much lower. So you can use that to help understand where the higher risk is and how it varies from year to year. So just wanted to talk a bit about microclimate. So if we look at the figure on the left, the picture on the left is different temperatures that were measured in the south-facing woodland in the Netherlands in 1976. So you can just pick out some of the values here. So on the vertical tree trunk, you could get 45, this is all in degrees C. And at the same time, in a shady hollow, you can get -2 degrees C. So the variability within a small area is massive. And of course, species make use of this variability to survive. And so on the right here, I'm just showing that the temperatures that we measure in a Stevenson screen, which is the white screen here, you see, which is what our network of observations are based on, is nowhere near the microclimate in many places that the pests and pathogens survive in. And Margaret and Izard said that weather data errors represent the most common cause of arthropod and disease forecast model failure because of the complexity of representing the plant microclimate, which is highly variable in space and time. So we did do some work modeling microclimate with colleagues at Exeter University. And some of the work I'm just showing here is for oak processionary moth. And we estimated emergence dates using a gridded met station climate data and also using microclimate data from our estimates from the microclimate model. So on the left here shows the emergence date in day of year for 2017 that we estimated using hourly microclimate temperatures. And on the right here, what we did was we took that microclimate from the macroclimate or the met station climate. And so you can see the colors represent either earlier emergent states or later emergent states if you're using microclimate data or not. So in some cases, it can be about 50 days later or earlier, depending on which climate data you're using. So it's really important. And there's a lack of available microclimate data and indeed pest observations for validating these estimates. So although we can estimate with microclimate data, we don't know how close they are. So we're working a bit more trying to get those estimates now and see how good the microclimate models are. So just to go on to a bit about urban climate. So urban heat islands can enhance the risk from many pests or pathogens that are susceptible to warmer climate. So I think we all know that as you go through an urban profile, the temperatures tend to rise and other climate conditions change as well. But this is more suitable for many warm-loving pests and pathogens. And so one, for example, is the oak processionary moth. And the maps on the right rather, show some estimates of the first flight date of oak processionary moth between 2017 and 2020. And this was done because oak processionary moth was starting to spread across the UK from its first observation in southeast and in central London. And so so we estimated that in July in the London area was really the area that was the earliest first flight. And indeed, this is work done by Marzano et al. And the oak processionary moth infestations were shown around the London area first, and then now they've started to spread a lot more. And this is the quarantine area that was used initially in, I think it was 2018. So just to finish up, so there has been some work done on modeling tree pests and pathogens in urban areas, and this is work done by Webb et al. In 2023. And it's looking at the likelihood of spread across linear features such as tree lines, lining across roads, and also spreading more widely. And it does show that there's more rapid spread generally along the tree lines, and the radial spread is dependent on the species mix and the density of trees. So just to finishing off, there's lots of information out there, and people here are much experts in managing UK plant pests and pathogens. And I just put an assortment here of the information that's out there. Key thing is really that what the forest researchers highlight is it's important to have the right tree in the right place for a resilient future. And the mix of trees and the density of trees is important for ensuring that the trees and the woodlands are more resilient to pest spread and pest infestations. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Debbie. Very interesting. And I think the climate pest risk web tool, which you talked about, is a must for anyone who's building a tree, working on a tree strategy or policy, and looking at tree selection for resilience. So thank you for that. And it's up on the link to that is up in the chat room. So thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
We've got time for a couple of quick questions. One of them is, so we've had a very dry May. How long does it take to start measuring impacts?
I think observations are really difficult because the pests could, in terms of pests, you mean all the impacts of the pests. Either way, the pests could be there, but you don't observe them. Or so having observations of where pests and pathogens are is a really, it's been the hardest part of this work, to try and validate the modelling. We work with DEFRA's plant health team, and they work with the surveillance teams that go out to the fields and also are in the ports to observe. But it's very difficult. Any data that we can get is ideal. Generally, a drier and a warmer spring you might expect there to be an earlier outbreak of a warm-loving pest. But obviously a delay in like a phytophthora, which likes the wet. Sorry, I can't be more informed.
No, that's very good. I thought you were going to say it'd be several years or decades before we actually see impacts, but it is it's a real tough one. The follow on to that was, can we use pests to manage pests, or is it all up for change?
Oh yes, definitely. It's certainly not my area, but there are people who look at I've forgotten the name, but the predation of different insects by other insects. So yeah, it's an area that I think is growing in the UK, and maybe Tony, you probably know more about this than I do, but yes, it's definitely something that's applied in some areas, but you obviously have to be careful that you don't introduce something that is going to cause problems elsewhere.
Yeah. I mean, I think your life must be very interesting with this changing climate, because, gosh, I mean, this year and 2024 and 2025 have been so different in comparison to each other, and who knows what's going to happen, what next year will look like. So I don't know how you go from year to year even. So it's a tough one, but the work you do is very, very important. Now, on some of the maps that you showed, the sort of spread of pests was from the southeast outwards into UK. Is that the way that all pests, do they all spread in the same way from that southeast corner, or is that just the two that you chose?
I think a lot do, but it depends where they're introduced. So I think for things like for plant trade, plants can be imported from say a source where there's pests or pathogens on them. They could be imported anywhere into the UK, and from there can be outbreaks, and there have been, particularly from nurseries, tree nurseries in the past. It's very highly regulated now, but generally climate influences from the south and east, and also there's much more trade coming in there. So think recent outbreak of Colorado beetle was in the Southampton area. It's not sure whether it came across, flew across, unlikely, or came across in some kind of boat or ship.
Yeah.
And then the climate was more suitable there than further north.
Okay. I think this next question, I think, is probably more going to be aimed at Lisa, our next speaker, but it's how is the long-term pest forecast? Thinking of scenarios for climate change adaptation and choice of species in landscape design. It's a tough one, that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, climate change is warming and getting more extreme. So the species that are warm loving are getting closer to us and having small outbreaks, but there are more that are suitable for arriving in the UK and surviving in the UK than we currently have. So I know that DEFRA's plant risk register highlights the priority ones, and we try to support research on that. In terms of choosing the right trees and the right plants, I think there's a lot can be done, more than is currently done that I know of, to ensure that the plants for the future and the trees for the future are at least pests and pathogens, and future pests and pathogens have been considered, and maybe choosing more resilient ones, or ones that can survive a future drier and warmer climate, but are also more resilient to those dry loving pests and pathogens. I think that's the way to go. And I think urban areas particularly, because they tend to be warmer, but also there's that cluster of people and movement and trade and travel. So
I think you're absolutely right. And choosing the right tree for the right place for the right reason, and a tree that can cope with if drought conditions, waterlogging conditions, whatever, that will become more stress-free, is more likely to be able to defend itself against pathogens. So I think that's a good place to finish your presentation, Debbie. So thank you very much. I'm sure there may be some more questions at the end. So when we've allowed time at the end for some backup questions that I've missed. So thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Our next speaker, who I know very well, is Lisa Smith, Head of Tree Health Policy and Plant Health Evidence and Analysis at DEFRA. And Lisa's going to talk to us about where we are now, where things are going, and how the government is responding. So, Lisa, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tony. I'm just going to try and share my screen now, rather unhelpfully. The other screen's just gone over the top, but okay, here we go. Can you see that? Has that come up for everybody?
It just needs to go to full screen. That's
there you go.
Perfect.
Yep, you're on.
Are we on?
Yeah,
okay.
We're on.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Tony, and thank you for the invitation to speak at your event. So I'm going to talk to you about the work that government is doing to help protect our nation's trees from pests and diseases. So I don't need to tell this audience how valuable our trees are to us here in the UK, but our economists have been trying to put an actual value and quantify figures on some of the services that they provide. So I thought I'd present this infographic to make you aware of that work, because it might be of interest to you. And they've managed to quantify about £11 billion worth of annual value that our trees provide to our society. Now, that's obviously a vast underestimate, but it's what we've managed to quantify so far, and that work continues. But as well as being valuable, Debbie's already mentioned about the fact that our trees are very vulnerable. So although trees account for 80% of our biomass in Northern Europe, they account for only about 3% of the diversity of our planted landscapes. And we can see that trend reflected here in England as well. So if you look at the pie charts up on the left, just 6 species of conifer make up 88% of our total conifers in England. And likewise, 6 species of broadleaves make up just 66% of our native broadleaf cover. So it doesn't take a lot for one issue or for one pest or disease to knock out a species and have a really significant impact on our landscape. And Tony's already mentioned these vertical graphs. You've already seen one of them from Debbie. But the one on the left, the global one, was some work done by USDA a couple of years ago, where they were looking globally at the number of new detections of tree diseases each year. And they estimated that that number is doubling every 11 years. So their line in black, if you like, is rising exponentially with no sign of a peak at the moment in sight. And again, we've got that trend unfortunately reflected here in Great Britain. So if you look back in the Forestry Commission data over the last 40 years or so, you can see that in the last 16 years, we've made 21 detections of new tree pests and diseases compared to only 5 in the 30 years prior to that. So what are we doing about it? Well, we've got a very strategic and structured approach to managing this threat. We published our GB plant biosecurity strategy back in 2023. That's got 4 biosecurity outcomes focused around the work government does and its regulatory regime, and promoting a society that really values healthy plants and works with us to protect them, working with industry to make plant supply chains more biosecure, and also looking at our science and technology and building capability around plant health in that area as well. And within that overarching biosecurity framework, we've got a really focused effort on trees. And that's focused on 3 resilience outcomes, looking to reduce the risk to our trees, looking to respond and recover quickly when threats or outbreaks do occur, and also driving those long-term adaptations that have already been mentioned to make our trees more resilient to future threats. So things like diversifying our species, planting more trees, increasing the condition of the trees that are out there in the landscape. So if we take each of those outcomes in turn, then reducing the risk, of course, starts with understanding the risk and being able to identify it. So Debbie mentioned Dominic. He works in our risk and horizon scanning team. We've got a whole team of people dedicated to carrying out that risk and horizon scanning activity, looking for new threats around the world and how new pests and diseases might arrive here. All of that information goes onto our UK Plant Health Risk Register, which is publicly available. You can download it. It contains the details of over 1,400 pests and diseases, each of them ranked for the likelihood of the arrival here and the impact they may have if they do arrive. And we're looking, and we use that risk register to drive our work. So we're looking not only at the sort of top pests or pathogens that might get here, but also what might be the cumulative impact of many pests or diseases on a single species. So you can see, for example, some statistics from the register and see that we've got over 90 pests and diseases on there that can impact oak. And we're looking at what the impact of those might be on oak overall. But when it comes to the sort of top 3 most unwanted, here are the ones I'm promoting for you to look out for. So we really don't want these here. We haven't got them at the moment. So Xylella, a bacterial plant pathogen spreading through Europe, has had a devastating impact on olive groves in Italy, can impact some of our native trees such as oak. So we really want to keep it out. Emerald ash borer, a rather beautiful jewel beetle, but a very invasive pest of ash, has killed millions of trees in America when it's got there. We really don't want it here. It will be a real risk to the ash that's left back after ash dieback. And we've got really strict controls on wood that coming into the country now because of this pest. It's spreading here from Russia. It's got to the Ukraine. They are sort of estimating it's spread about 5 kilometers in the last 5 to 6 years in the Ukraine. So it can spread rapidly if the conditions are favorable, and we really want to keep it out. And then the final one I want to highlight is canker stain of plane, previously known as plain wilt. The picture you can see here is the impact along the Canal du Midi in France, where they've had to fell all their plane trees due to this pathogen. We really don't want to see scenes like that here in the UK. I mean, just imagine the public response and the devastating impact of felling all the plane trees along the mall. So we really want to keep that out. That can be spread by infected equipment used by the ARB industry. So if you're traveling to places abroad where this pathogen is present, please do make sure you disinfect your equipment when you come back to the UK. So that sort of tees me up nicely to just sort of introduce some of the ways in which pests and diseases can arrive. So some of them arrive here naturally on the wind. Some of them can spread through infected equipment or vehicles. Other things can hitchhike on people and vehicles as well. And here's one such example. This is the plain lace bug, a rather beautiful little bug. It's about 2 millimeters long, so it's very tiny. But we detected this first in London and in the UK last year on some amenity trees planted outside of King's Cross St Pancras station. And you can see on the picture on the right, the very distinctive yellow discoloration of the center of the leaves spreading outwards. And if you were to go to King's Cross, you'd see it on the plane trees there now today. You can turn those leaves over and you'll see all the little white bugs on the underside of the leaves feeding off the leaf and causing that discoloration. And given where we find it, King's Cross St Pancras, we believe the way in which this has got here is through the Channel Tunnel. So we know that in Gardenour, at the other side of the tunnel, they've got some very heavily infested plane trees. And we believe the bug has been dropping on passengers and baggage as they've sort of, walked through those trees, and then they've gone on the tunnel and alighted at this end. And, the bugs have flown off and found some plane trees nearby. And we've now found that in various London locations. But things can also arrive here in more sort of routine ways, and particularly trade is one of our major risk pathways. And one of the largest risks I want to promote here today is the trade in these large trees. So the increasing demand for these instant impact landscapes and trees is a real biosecurity threat. Large trees like these are very difficult to inspect, to detect any pests or disease they might be harboring. Pests and diseases can also lie latent or dormant on such trees for a number of months or even years. They get planted out into the landscape, and then when anything emerges, it's very easy for it to find another susceptible host and to impact our native flora as well. So if you are bringing large trees into the country, please make sure you abide by the regulations, you source your trees from reputable suppliers and from the safest sources possible. So when it comes to biosecurity, our sort of border controls are the first line of defense. We have a sort of blooming trade in plants, if you like, but around 16 billion of the 18 billion pound trade in plants is imports. So we are bringing a lot of plants and a lot of plant commodities into the country. We have about 90 border control posts and 55 control plant posts where that material is subject to risk-based checks and inspections. And we know that last year, those checks and inspections resulted in the interception of over 500 quarantine pests and pathogens at the border. So the highest risk material will be subject to the highest risk checks. All trees are designated high risk imports, so they will all be subject to risk-based inspections. And you can see some of the data for interception data coming out of those imports presented here on the right. So we're systematically screening all the time and looking at the data for what sort of pest species are arriving in the import trade, where are those imports coming from, what host species are we having problems with? And that data is directly informing the intelligence on the ground and our inspectors that are pulling things off the import lines for inspection. So we got that systematic screening constantly going on, and where necessary, we will introduce stronger measures or import controls where we believe there's a threat. And there's sort of routinely 2 to 3 times a year, we will drop new measures or legislation. And you can find out more details about the sort of upcoming controls in the Plant Health portal and the newsletters that go out to industry. As well as at the border, we also carry out a lot of surveillance inland, which Debbie has mentioned. So between our inspectorate at the Forestry Commission and also the Animal and Plant Health Agency, we are carrying out aerial surveillance over 1 million hectares of woodlands and forests in the UK. Over 40,000 individual trees are subject to inspections and ground surveys, 6,000 nurseries, parks, gardens, and other sites that have received trees will be subject to inspections on an annual basis, as well as our forest trapping network that is looking for invasive insect species as well that could pose a threat. And as well as that official surveillance activity, we also support and fund citizen science. And one of our major initiatives is Observatory. This is some great work going on with this initiative at the Woodland Trust and the Forest Research and the Forestry Commission. Go and have a look at their website. They've got some really great resources when it comes to how do you identify different pests and diseases of trees. They are a volunteer network of over 200 volunteers, but we have trained them to go out into their local areas and further afield to look at their local trees and report any problems. And any problems they find or suspect are reported to Tree Alert, which is our website where anyone can upload a report if they suspect that they found something suspicious or they've seen a tree in ill health. So if you see something in your local area, report it to Tree Alert. That report goes direct into our official surveillance system, and our inspectorate will go out if they think they need to see what's happening on the ground. But we can't mitigate all risks. So sometimes things arrive here naturally, or sometimes things will arrive here through trade. So what we aim to do then is respond very quickly and rapidly and robustly to annihilate that threat as it occurs, because we know if we catch something quickly, it will be less costly in the long run in both monetary terms to government, to industry, and also in terms of the environmental damage that can occur. And some of the outbreaks we've dealt with in recent years are listed here on the left-hand side. One to highlight at the moment is Ips typographus. That's the 8-tooth spruce bark beetle that is blowing here from continental Europe, where they've got really high levels of infestation and outbreaks. We're stamping out about 20 outbreaks of that a year in the southeast region. So we've talked about the southeast being under particular threat. That's one we want to keep out. It's known as an industry killer when it comes to the forestry industry. So we're being very vigilant for that one. And then Debbie's already mentioned oak processionary moth, but I just wanted to sort of highlight some of the work that government is doing around that, as well as the sort of research and the modelling that Debbie has highlighted. We have an official control programme of about £1.5 million. You can see from the map in the middle there, the red area are OPM detections, and they're sort of covering the established area in London. And then we've got this yellow buffer zone or control zone around the established area where our official surveillance and control activity takes place. And that aims to keep the pest contained and suppressed to the London area and keep the green area, the rest of the country, pest free. And we did have an issue in 2019 where import controls abroad in European nurseries broke down, and they ended up sending us thousands of infested trees, which we then had to trace. So we had to trace 50,000 trees from 28 different European suppliers back down to over 100 planting sites on the ground to annihilate and neutralize 75 outbreaks that occurred. So that's the type of activity we do at a government level. Lots of research going on biological control solutions and natural solutions to this pest as well to help manage the risk to the public and to trees. So we fund a lot of research. Over £700 million per annum is invested in research on plant and tree health, both in universities and public sector research establishments. But also we look at innovation in industry as well. And we've invested over 30 million in innovation to sort of secure and promote the domestic supply of trees going forwards. And some work that we've also been doing, looking at sort of adaptation and resilience in the environment, has been looking at survival rates of trees in the urban landscapes and how we can promote their survival when they're planted and promote their health as well. There's a program called the Trees Outside Wood program that's just coming to an end. So it's got some really great data now going out into the public domain. Have a look at it. There's been 4 pilots running, some really innovative stuff going on, like pilot 1 has been trialing survival rates through planting under an approach known as Miyawaki, and they've been getting 80% survival rates of trees in the urban environment compared to less than 50 through planting by traditional means. And we already briefly mentioned what species do we need for the future. There is work going on in government around that. Forest Research are developing a tool that will help guide your planting decisions in the future. But please also look at some of the stuff that's out there. Also, Kew have produced a great sort of plan around their succession plan, they've estimated that about 50% of their 11,000 trees on Kew site could be at risk by 2090, and they're looking at what future species to promote. And we will be publishing more information about that shortly as well as work that we're doing to look at restoring lost tree species back into the landscape, like ash that is under threat from ash dieback. So finally, my final slide is just to say thank you really for working with us on this agenda. We work closely with a lot of the organisations represented in the audience today to raise biosecurity standards through initiatives like Plant Healthy, but also to raise public awareness as well during initiatives like National Plant Health Week. So thank you to you all for your help and support, because we couldn't do it without you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Great presentation, and lots of interesting information there. I have a quick question, and that's with OPM, we've got the outbreak area where it's recorded, and the buffer zone that stretches out quite a distance. Are we allowed to move oaks, young oaks, within that buffer zone from infected areas?
So there are restrictions on what you can move depending on where you are in the country. So you can't, if you're in the buffer zone or the established area, you absolutely cannot move oak trees into the pest-free area.
Yeah.
If you're in the buffer zone, you can move into the established area and you can move into the buffer zone, apart from the outer 10 kilometers of the buffer zone. That is like a little cordon sanitaire that aims to keep our pest-free area free. So, but have a look. It is quite complex, so do have a look. But there's an interactive map to help you that will tell you what zone you're in, and potentially if you want to move a tree, what zone you're moving it to and whether that's allowed.
Okay, thank you. That clears something up for me. Well, we've got quite a few questions. One of them is, let me see. Should designers and their clients accept that large instant impact is not the way to design with trees? There has been some patience with there has to be some patience with nature. Also, high carbon costs of transporting large trees. And I think that actually leads on to another question, which I saw about we should be using plant healthy approved nurseries in the UK and supporting the UK tree industry, who are right up to date with everything that you've spoken about, Lisa, and we can trust what they're doing. So, an interesting one here is: do you find within the biosecurity check centres it's difficult to attract the workforce you need? Does someone have to be highly qualified to identify the pest and disease?
Okay, do you want me to tackle all of those, Tony?
Oh, sorry. No, well, one of them was I think tackle the last one. The earlier ones were really comments that I'm sure you'd agree with, that we should be supporting UK nurseries and plant healthy.
Yeah, absolutely support your sort of plant healthy certified nurseries, and we're doing the same in government through our sort of biosecure procurement programs. In terms of recruitment of inspectors, I mean, that is continual work in itself, and yes, it is an ongoing challenge, but we have increased our inspectorate. I think we've recruited over 200 new inspectors in the last couple of years that are now out there on the front line, and they all undergo training on a routine basis, you know, for what they're looking for. And there is a sort of great support network for them as well. So they will, if they suspect anything, but they're not sure about it, they'll take samples, they'll send that off to our diagnostic laboratories. So we've got reference laboratories based at Ferrous Science Limited in York, and also Forest Research in Scotland and Alice Holt in the south. They'll send any samples off to the relevant laboratory, and they'll get an answer back as to whether there's a quarantine pest or pathogen present if they're not sure.
And how are these border controls looking, Lisa? Because this must be what, the second year or the end of the first year that they've been active?
Yeah, so I mean, you can see from the data that I presented that we do intercept quite a large number of quarantine pests and diseases at the border. So, you know, routinely over 500 interceptions are made at the border each year. Obviously, government has just announced the new EU-UK SPS agreement, which will be facilitating trade between the UK and Europe. So that agreement will be looking to sort of remove those routine checks on goods, you know, traversing the border between the UK and Europe. But we will still, within that framework, have the provision to have controls on material that we deem to be of higher risk. So where we are free of pests, but those pests are present in Europe, you could still expect to see some level of control on imports coming into the country.
Okay, thank you. And I saw on the news at the weekend that OPM was reported to be in Norfolk, an outbreak. No comment?
No comment on that one.
Okay. Lisa, we've run out of time. Thank goodness on that question. I thank you for a very interesting presentation and bringing us up to speed with everything that DEFRA is doing to keep us pest free. Thank you. Okay. I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Adam Dunnett. Adam's a director at Hillier's Nursery. We'll talk about the tree nursery industry and how they are protecting biosecurity. Adam, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Tony. I'll just try and get the presentation up and running, which hopefully will be shortly. Right, can you see, is that looking good?
Wrong screen, Adam. You need to change your display settings, please. If you move your cursor to the top of the screen, there's 3 things at the top. There, display settings.
Ah, yes.
And then I think you need to switch. Swap or...
Duplicate slideshows. So, that look better?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good.
We're good? Excellent. Right. Okay. So I'm Adam Dunnett, as Tony has introduced, Community Director of Hillier Nurseries. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what sort of nurseries are doing to make us a little bit more sort of biosecure. There will be quite a lot of repeats from what you've heard from Lisa and sort of Tony already. But I think sort of repeating some of these things is never a bad thing. So first of all, for those of you who haven't come across Hillier Nurseries before, we've been around for a while, been established for 160 years. We are a sort of a family-owned 5th generation nursery and garden centre group. And we grow about 1 million shrubs, 2 litre to sort of 30 litre, of which majority of that go through our 22 garden centres. It's sold through our 22 garden centres. And we also grow about 1 million trees, field grown and container trees, on about 700 acres of land. And those trees, which are sort of sold from 8 to 10 centimetre girth up to about 100 centimetre girth, sold into the landscape, amenity, local authority, private estate sectors. And biosecurity for any nursery is really, really important. In fact, it's sort of fairly critical to our business or the sustainability of our continued business. A number of years ago, we were thinking sort of how do we deal with sort of biosecurity, and one of the first things we thought we needed to do was put a biosecurity policy together, that policy needed to be something that was workable, sort of everyday, sort of workable document. It couldn't just be well-intentioned words. I pulled out a sort of a few of the points that we sort of that are contained within our biosecurity policy, which I'll go through in a little bit sort of more detail as we go through this presentation. But the key was everyone had to buy into our biosecurity policy within our team, and everyone has to live it every single day, which I'm pleased to say is the case. So I thought I'd sort of get the plug for British grown trees in early. I'm slightly biased as a UK tree grower. And sort of 96% of the trees we sell are grown in our field, UK grown. And in terms of sort of definition, our definition of British grown tree is that it has to be on our nursery or in our fields for a minimum of five seasons. But we think that sort of British grown trees are really important part of the supply chain, and perhaps slightly undervalued. Certainly, I mean, if it was possible to only buy British plants, then sort of the biosecurity risk would largely be eliminated. Now I know that isn't entirely possible. And as I said, we buy in 4% of our trees to complete customer orders. We also buy in trees, young trees, for sort of planting out into our fields. So we have to do it, but we take very sort of strict rules on how we go about that and who we buy from. But I do think that there needs to be sort of greater value placed on sort of buying British grown plants, and I would implore people to use British grown nurseries and British grown trees and plants whenever and wherever you possibly can. In terms of sort of biosecurity, one of the sort of key things I think is making sure that you're accredited and you're policed, and you're watched on what you're doing to ensure that you've got best practice in biosecurity. Hilliers, we hold ISO 14001. We're part of sort of Planet Mark. We also have the Woodland Trust UK and Island Sown and Grown accreditation, who now work quite closely with Plant Healthy that both Lisa and Tony have already spoken about. But Plant Healthy really, I think, is one accreditation along with the UK ISG that I would say is one of our key biosecurity defences now, and certainly one that we hold very highly. Very proud to hold Plant Healthy and have done for a number of years. But I think that is something, again, if you're purchasing plants, if you're nominating plants or a plant supplier in the UK, then I would really encourage you to make part of that stipulation that has to be a Plant Healthy nursery. And actually, Plant Healthy needs to go beyond just the nurseries. I know the Plant Healthy team are encouraging as many horticultural businesses that deal with plants to become Plant Healthy certified, and they've sort of set the bar at a reasonably low level. It is achievable for anyone that's doing reasonably good biosecurity practice to become Plant Healthy certified, but it means that you're continuously monitored to ensure that you're doing that going forward. The fact of the matter is that there just aren't enough of us that are Plant Healthy certified. you can see on the screen that there's only 93 horticultural businesses that are currently Plant Healthy accredited. I know talking to Malcolm at Plant Healthy is fairly confident that it won't be very long before they hit the 100 mark. But when you consider the HGA, for instance, say that there's like 2,200 nurseries and garden centres in the UK. There's other statistics that say there are over 21,000 landscape businesses in the UK. When I put it into Copilot earlier and asked the question, it told me that there was 163,500 professional gardeners and landscapers in the UK. So whatever the number is, 93 is a shed load more than 93, and 93 is not enough. So we need to really publicise the importance of becoming plant healthy certified as a major sort of biosecurity defence. Plant suppliers said you want to be dealing with a Plant Healthy certified business nursery if you can, but that's not always going to be possible. And certainly, if you're dealing with nurseries outside the UK, though, that accreditation doesn't exist in that form at the moment. So if you're bringing in plants from Europe or from wider afield, then you have to be really, really careful on who you use, and you can't rely on sort of wonderful looking websites and glossy magazines to decide whether a nursery supplier is biosecure or not. And the only way to do it is to sort of do the hard miles, to know your suppliers, to go out there and see them, and certainly. At Hillier, we aim to, or don't aim, we do go out and make sure that we see every one of our suppliers at least every other year. We spend a week in the summer, myself and a small team going around all our European suppliers. We're looking at stock that we might want to buy in the next season. But at the same time, we're doing a biosecurity audit. And from that, we have to remove some nurseries from our approved buying list. Now, there are plenty of exceptionally good European nurseries with the highest biosecurity standards, but unfortunately, there are some that take biosecurity slightly less seriously. And you really have to understand and know that stock. And also, it sort of reduces your risk at sort of the border control points, because if I know who the slightly less biosecure nurseries are, you can bet your bottom dollar the AFA inspectors at the BCP's border control points absolutely will know that, and it's an intelligence-led process, is sort of border control and plant inspectors. So they're going to be targeting those nurseries that have a poorer record than others. So it makes a lot of sense to make sure that your suppliers are biosecure. And we list a criteria of a sort of good supplier. And number one is sort of their biosecurity credentials and how good a nursery they are, how clean they are. Quality and price come under that, and I think that should be the way that a supplier is looked at. We also hold sort of staff training at a sort of very high level. It's really, really important that your staff understand the importance of biosecurity, and also can identify key pests and diseases on your nursery and any stock that might come into it. That you need to be able to cut out any problem at its earliest possible stage. And we do the sort of staff training right from day one, literally, our induction program. So most Mondays at 9:15 a.m. I can be found in our training room here at head office, and we ask every new employee to come into our head office for their first day have an induction training day. And the first presentation they get is from myself and our nursery manager, where we talk about what we do in sort of trees and on the nurseries. And a big part of my presentation is about biosecurity. Now, quite often, I'm just sort of talking to a group of restaurant chefs who may not be entirely focused on biosecurity. It may not be critical to their day-to-day, but our view is that everyone should be aware of the importance of biosecurity, and even a restaurant chef may well go home and talk to his family about the potential risks of sort of going abroad and bringing plants back in, and those little things help. But we really get stuck into the sort of training with our nursery staff. So we have a buddy program where sort of more senior staff take new staff under their wings and help them sort of train in sort of P&D field identification, and that's an ongoing process. And at least twice a year, we sort of rip out the chairs and tables in the staff rooms, and one of the staff from our training department goes into those rooms and gives classroom style training. And we also have the Hillier Learning Hub, which is something we developed in recent years, where staff can go onto their phones, onto their laptops, and there's a whole suite of different modules that they can access on biosecurity. The one put up here on the screen is one on our friend oak processionary moth, so people can learn a little bit more sort of detail about that. So just sort of round it up, really. I think biosecurity for a nursery really does have to be at the heart of our business. I like to think that it really is at Hillier, and you really do have to sort of live and love that sort of biosecurity. And if you do, it can reap rewards. So not only do you have a more secure nursery, which is critically important, but you can pick up the odd award from it as well. So the Pro Landscaper Awards last year, we were fortunate enough to win the Sustainability and Biodiversity Nursery of the Year, and a big chunk of that was around biosecurity. And Hillier's over the years, we've been lucky enough to win the odd industry award, and I can tell you this award we won last year was one of the ones that the team on the nurseries was most proud of. It validated all the hard work they put into the work we do on biosecurity. We're not perfect by any means, we're always learning, and you can never let your guard down when it comes to biosecurity, but it is critically important to a nursery. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Adam, and good to see what Plant Healthy is, and a nursery that adheres to Plant Healthy and is selling and working with clean stock. We haven't got a lot of time for questions at this stage, but just one question in particular, if I can find it, and that is, are there any trees commercially available which are grown from cutting seed to standard size, all in the UK?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, an awful lot. I mean, quite a lot. Probably about 30 or 40% of everything we grow, we propagate ourselves from budding or from cutting. So we're one, and we're certainly not the only UK nursery that propagates. And we use quite a lot of UK nurseries. An awful lot of our seedling stock comes from UK nurseries, from sort of seed source from the UK. So yeah, certainly there is a reasonable percentage, I would say, that would have its origins from the UK, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and I think it's becoming more and more. I remember when I had a walk round Hilliard the last time I was there, and I was watching grafting, field grafting, or budding, etc., in the field, and I know the rootstocks were even UK grown, and then everything grafted on site, which is really encouraging. So, Adam, thank you. Very, very useful, very informative, and I think there's also a link to the Plant Healthy accreditation in the chat. So if anyone's keen on becoming Plant Healthy certified, or wants to know more about it, it's a very interesting link with lots of information on there, similar to what you've talked to us about today, Adam. So thank you. Good.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker are two, a brace. Ben Brace is one of them, actually, coincidentally, who's a landscape architect with Pad Landscapes, and Harry Watkins, who's director at St Andrews Botanic Garden, who I commented earlier. He was renowned for drowning magnolias to see how resilient magnolias were to waterlogging, and we should, if we'd have had the RSP T, cruelty to trees, then I think you would definitely have gone there. You'd have been picked up, Harry, for cruelty to magnolias. But anyway, they're going to talk about the Landscape Institute's biosecurity toolkit from research to practice. So Ben and Harry, over to you.
Thanks, Tony. No, thank you everyone for having us. I'm talking to you from St Andrews, where we do a lot of research on tree health and climate adaptation, but we also are developing a plant nursery. And it's been really interesting hearing the conversations over the last couple of talks, talking about the issues with provenance and supply. And this is what Ben and I are going to be talking about, how we take this research into practice and how we take this cross-sector approach to solving one of these really difficult, almost intractable challenges. So through the Botanic Garden, we've been doing pieces of work for a range of bodies over the last couple of years, including Plant Health Centre Scotland, Woodland Trust. We did some work for DEFRA over the last couple of years. And what we're really interested in is how these different sectors within our industry come together and create, in some instances, gaps in our understandings, in some instances, challenges. And we're trying to also put our finger on some of the things which I think between us, we all kind of know exist to some extent or not, but really try and quantify some of the issues we're dealing with. So the first piece of research I wanted to share with you, we did for Plant Health Centre Scotland a few years ago, where we looked at all the major planning applications that were submitted in Scotland in the green infrastructure world. And we looked at the plans that were approved by local authorities, and then we took those plans to site and saw what was planted. And again, this is probably not a huge surprise to everyone, but the numbers, when you put them together, are quite surprising and challenging. So we found, for example, that only 24% of the schemes in Scotland delivered actually meet the spec that was approved by the local authority. So we've got this huge challenge that comes out of variations to contracts, substitutions, species selection, all this kind of thing. We've got this huge challenge then between what's happening at the practice level and what policymakers then understand as happening. As we cast our eyes forwards to biodiversity net gain, things like that, we can see this problem probably becoming really acute. We also found that it's not just about biosecurity and not just in terms of specification, but it's, when we look at the actual knowledge base that we're working with, a lot of the projects include species that are known to be invasive, that are on the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 schedule as being regarded as invasive. So we've got this huge aspect of training which needs to go with this. On the back of this research, we produced a database which we're just in the process of updating at the moment. It's going to be published, I think, in the next month or so. But what we did is we added up all of the species that are used in green infrastructure and looked at what people are using, or at least I should say wanting to use. And it was interesting looking at the data that Lisa shared earlier. And one of the things that struck me when Lisa was saying that there are 6 tree species that make up 66% of our broadleaf diversity, you kind of think, well, okay, look, there's, depending on your view of microspecies and how to treat sorbus, there's 50 odd, just under 50 native tree species that you would probably want to see in a woodland kind of context. If you're dealing in a green infrastructure world, you've got a much larger palette of plants that you're really working with. And yet we see the same kind of number here. So we've got here, in terms of trees, the top 5 most widely planted species accounting for over 54% of tree diversity. And then it tails off pretty quickly after that. So there's this huge gap, I think, when we're looking at urban tree selection and tree selection in green infrastructure projects, to think more broadly about like, what kind of trees are appropriate to be using. We then did a piece of work for Plant Health Centre Scotland, following on the back of this, where we looked at then how we might then turn these kind of findings into practice and provide guidance to decision makers. And one of the things we looked at very closely was the Plant Health Risk Register. And if you've ever downloaded it, it's a fantastic piece of work. It's a huge spreadsheet that you can get from the FERA website, or from the DEFRA website. And you can look at it and find all these pests and diseases that you might be interested in. But from a plant person's perspective, it's really difficult to interact with, because if you want to know about Quercus roba or Quercus petraea, you've got to do a control F of Quercus and then roba, petraea, whatever. And you're then scattering through this huge spreadsheet of where to find Quercus. And it's very difficult to use comparatively to understand, say, the difference between Quercus and Prunus or any other genera that we might be interested in using. So what we did is we reprogrammed the risk register so that you could look at it from the perspective of plants. And what we did is we created what we're calling like a mitigated risk register for tree species and tree genera. And what we did is we searched through the register and turned it around, where we added up all of the risks associated with a particular genus or species, and then added them together. We had a top and tailing exercise to make sure that we could keep it comparative. And of course, once you take out all the potatoes and tomatoes, which are affected by pests and diseases, what jumps out at you is that trees are not equally vulnerable or susceptible to pests and diseases. But then also, so is our understanding of how these pests and diseases operate. So there's a lot of divergence here for us to get our heads around, but it was really interesting to see some of these rosaceae genera coming out, Prunus essentially being associated with the largest number of pests and diseases, and the pests and diseases which have the highest risk ratings, followed pretty quickly by the crab apples and the pines. And after that, then the oaks and willows and poplars coming through later on. But this is a piece of work which can be published, I think, in a couple of months' time. And I'm really hoping that we can start to use this in an industry and understand how we might then choose plants in response. I think we're taking a cross-sector approach to understanding this. And what's really important to this is looking at how we actually work and having some pretty frank conversations with our practices and our clients and our colleagues in other sectors. And this is quite an interesting graph to share with you, I hope. We interviewed a large number of landscape architects, urban foresters, garden designers, online surveys, conversations, discussions, in-person surveys. And we asked people, like, how much time do you actually spend on a particular part of your work stream? And it was super interesting seeing how much time is front-loaded, essentially securing planning permission. And then of our time, then where is that then allocated afterwards? It tails off pretty quickly. And when I think about then the challenges of a cross-sector approach to biosecurity, when I think about the tools that we're going to need, the resources we're going to need, I think we need to really be able to kind of take this kind of information to our clients and say, you know, if you want the situation to change, you're going to need to structure the contracts differently in terms of how consultants are engaged. Now, there's a lot of work that needs to go alongside this to do with CPD and training and education throughout the industry, and that's fine. But this is really where it starts. I think we need to be able to show clients that there is a real risk to the ways that our industries are setting up our engagements with projects. So I think what these things come together to show is that we are looking at a system at the moment that is grappling with new species that we can see on our nurseries. We're looking at new forms of softwares that we're working with, but we're really struggling to implement them evenly and effectively, I think, across all the sectors. And so the question then becomes about a system level change. And what I wanted us to kind of really think about in this part of the talk was about the ways and means that we can kind of do this. And when I think about like this as a question, it's I think something which we very often treat as a supply question, like what plants are coming through the nurseries. It is also a demand question. We've got to think really carefully about what are we specifying and why. So that's great. That's what we could consider the means. But then let's think about the ways in which we're actually interacting between nurseries and landscape architects and urban foresters. These things need to come together. And so at the moment, we're spending a lot of time then thinking about data sources. And through the Urban Plant Lab, we're working at the moment on a series of data sources that we're going to be publishing and making available to the industry that provide really high quality information in a way that is software agnostic, that provides fundamental information about how plants perform and how they might interact in different situations. And at the moment, the industry standard that we've got, and I should say we're probably struggling to implement, is the product data templates. These are really, really hard to use, I think, as landscape architects. The Landscape Institute based the one that they're custodians of for Flora, I think, on they're called air conditioning units, HVAC systems. And so there's a lot of criteria in here that aren't useful to us. Any specifier who needs to fill out this for every single plant that they're using in a scheme is a pretty daunting exercise, especially when you've got, say, multiple formats of a single species. So we're looking at this really closely, thinking how we can improve this and what we can do for industry. We're going to be bringing together in this not only the plant physiology about like how these trees might perform under certain climate change scenarios, but then also how these plants are tolerant or susceptible to different types of risks. Measures security. Particularly keen on working on as well is this section here at the bottom, acceptable substitutions. We know that variations to contract happen. We know that there's always going to be a challenge about how to overcome that or deal with a supply chain issue. If we can, as an industry, think carefully about what kind of substitutions might be acceptable if a supplier or a nursery isn't able to provide what we want, but we still rate that nursery for, say, their biosecurity standards and their plant healthy accreditation, being able to say to a nursery, look, we know, we want this, but if you don't have it, we're willing to accept something else. That, I think, would be a really strong advantage for us and for the industry. There are benefits to this kind of approach that we want to really see. There's a lot of potential here across kind of like the policy world, all the way through the nursery sector and supply and the specification. Being able to do this in a way that works with our digital design softwares, being able to overcome a lot of the risk that nurseries especially carry in producing these plants. When we think about it, why is it so hard to get plants that are raised within the UK, let alone a specific country within the UK? It's because there is a huge amount of risk that's carried with producing plants that are grown to a specific size and format, and then maybe needed or not through the industry. So the more we can think about like what are acceptable variations to contract, acceptable substitutions, the more I think we can see then that resilience coming through. In terms of the next steps, Ben's going to talk us through the biosecurity toolkit that the Landscape Institute produced 5 years ago, that Ben and I worked on with Tim Arkell and the rest of the biosecurity working group. Within the Urban Plant Lab itself, we're going to be producing these data sheets, I think, in the late autumn, early winter. And my hope is that we can see then this resource of information coming together with the toolkit. What the toolkit is really focused on and frankly good at is aligning these questions with the processes that we all follow as professionals. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen here, and hand over to Ben to talk us through the toolkit.
Thanks, Harry. So yeah, I just want to take this opportunity just to run through the toolkit, as Harry mentioned that he and I worked on it with the wider working group, and it's published in 2019 to a great fanfare. Obviously needs updating. Not least to include, it doesn't include any references to a plant healthy scheme. So yeah, that would be obviously one of the initial sort of updates we would want to include. But it's essentially a guide that aligns key sort of biosecurity tools and kind of launch pads for conversations within and throughout a lifetime of a project, at every work stage, every work stage of a particular project, and then it ends with a sort of high level list of the typical pests and diseases for those key species that Harry outlined earlier, that are sort of typically and very regularly specified by landscape consultants, landscape architects. There we go. So typically, a landscape architect, landscape consultant will be engaged REBA stages 2 to 4, or at stage 2 to begin with. There are instances, obviously, where we're engaged earlier, but typically coming at sort of stage 2. And at that stage, obviously, as Harry highlighted there, a lot of our work is pre-planning to get that plan consent. And so before even sort of thinking about specifying a plant, the toolkit outlines various strategies to kind of help embed biosecurity within a project. But obviously, first and foremost, as a landscape architect, you need to ensure that you have a thorough understanding of the site, right plant, right place. Obviously, that book is pretty old and well thumbed on my desk, but that's the right starting point. Then it talks about designing plant communities. So an amazing book, Planting in the Post-Wild World, came out a few years ago by Thomas Rayner and Claudia West. It talks about designing a plant community in layers, and using a greater range of species will make that planting more resilient. Thinking about the 30-20-10 rule. Try and specify, when it comes to it, specify the smallest plant possible. Obviously, whilst talking about plant objectives, So Lisa mentioned earlier about this. Larger trees are the biggest vector for bringing in pests and diseases. They're difficult to check, and their mass just has a greater chance of bringing something in. So really, the toolkit encourages to really challenge that sort of perception that a landscape should be instant, and also thinking about plant health as well. Smaller trees are more, or smaller plants, they're more actively growing, so they'll establish quicker. Through these kind of initial pre-construction phase stages, it's good to liaise with nurseries to establish that UK grown stock and list. And if a large format tree has to be brought in, then obviously, or try and talking about within the project, within your capacity on the project, talk about a 12 months quarantine period, if possible. And again, through discussions on the project, discuss and try and add items again within your kind of remit and within your agency as the landscape consultant on a project, the kind of required biosecurity standards. And the key, a key tool in a landscape consultant's armory is contract growing or advanced procurement. So you're allowed to, so it allows you to secure that stock throughout the lifetime of the project, right until it's installed. So you have that control. So when we get to the kind of sharp end of a project, landscape construction and kind of handover, REBA stages 5 and 6, this is where that early stage work, or the early stages works, really comes to sort of fruit. But it's about writing and leaning on that specification that you've kind of drawn out and drawn up at the earlier stages. And we spoke about value engineering. That does present the greatest threat to the sort of biosecurity continuum, again, right at the sharp end of a project. But yeah, I think landscape architects, landscape consultants, we do have a lot of agency within projects. So we've got to really lean on the sort of watertight specifications that you produce as part of a pack, and don't be afraid to add in clauses within that specification that really tighten up the sort of biosecurity risks. So a lot of the time on a construction project, project planting seasons do not align with the construction program. So it's key to, again, open up that dialogue about phasing of plant material and planting, and possibly having a planting soft landscape contract separate to the main build contract, so you have more control over that. And then landscape management, so REBA stage 7. So again, leaning on the specification and the clear communication within specifications, that's a key tool for us at this sort of latter stages of a project, and highlighting those risks posed by pests and diseases within the management plan. Thinking about updating the toolkit has no reference to B&G. Obviously, you have the 30-year management requirements within that. That would be a really interesting thing to explore and really lay out within the toolkit. And as a project goes on, obviously new staff or changes in management occur. So it's key to kind of include the specifications within that new training and handover to staff, to new staff. That's a project that we're currently going through the REBA stage 7 at the moment. So Ryder Court in St James. So it's a real it's the first one I've ever done. So it's a learning experience for myself. So yeah, key takeaways, wrapping up, REBA stages 2 to 4. I think appropriate planting design according to the site with the smallest stock that you can. It really helps with plant health, resilience, and right plant, right place. Really lean on that age-old advice. Really embed biosecurity at the earliest stage throughout the project. At the earliest, conception of a project, wherever you can, and clearly and concisely add those biosecurity clauses into a spec as you move to the sort of the latter stages of a project. So yeah, REBA 5 and 6, again, within conversations with main contractors, subcontractors, that early engagement with them, talking about the biosecurity requirements of a particular project, and when it comes to it, leaning on your specification. So it's front loading the project, and making all of that watertight, and sort of mooting the idea of early procurement, contract growing of planting stock is the key weapon for us. And then as you kind of come to the close of a project, it really boils down to clear communication with sort of all involved parties, and hopefully ensuring that the landscape consultant is engaged for kind of regular site inspections. Boots on the ground are kind of critical, to kind of head off any sort of nasties that may or may not appear or come in from other projects, wider context. And that's me. But yeah, Tim thankfully posted a link to the toolkit in the chat, so please do have a look.
Lovely. Thank you, Harry and Ben. Yeah, there's a link actually to the book, to Thomas Rayner's book as well, in the chat. So it's that same old thing coming up, isn't it? Right plant in the right place. We often forget for the right reasons. So thank you, both of you, for an interesting talk. We have a few questions, but can I ask all the speakers to put their cameras on, please? And then we'll take some questions from the audience. Deanne, are you there, Deanne? Deanne, you had a question. I'm not sure I can find it now in the. Anyway, here it is for Deanne.
Oh, sorry.
That's yes. All right, Deanne. Do you want to ask it?
Oh, yes. So I was just curious as to who holds the risks when importing trees from abroad, if they show signs of disease and need to be destroyed, I guess.
That's probably one for Lisa.
Yeah, I've answered your question in the chat, but that will likely depend on who owns the tree when the quarantine pest or pathogen is detected. So if it's detected at the border, then it is likely that the importer will pay the costs. We will destroy the tree or we will re-export. And if the importer bears the costs, they can then try and recoup those from the original supplier abroad. And some people do that successfully, and sometimes it's not successful. It will depend on the level of evidence to support the claim, if you like. Likewise, if the tree is detected after planting out in the wider environment, when the clients purchased it and planted it out, and then it's subsequently found to have a quarantine pest or disease, again, it might be destroyed, but the landowner will bear the cost of that. And again, he can try and recoup that from the supplier in the UK and may or may not be successful. I have to say that a lot of the UK businesses, are very good at this, and they will provide a replacement, under that sort of scenario at least.
It is a complicated one. And I saw something in the chat box as well, Lisa, that having a good ID from DEFRA, from the labs, to say what pest it is, would be very useful if there's a compensation claim, or if the European nursery becomes difficult. So and that will be provided by AFA, I presume, or DEFRA.
It will come from our reference laboratory, so FERA or Forest Research.
Good. Have we got any questions? I can't see all the gallery, but if you put your hand up, I think if you put your hand up, you come into the gallery.
So meanwhile, Tony, I've been noticing there's been a lot of correspondence going on about chemical controls of pests and diseases. And my sort of counter thought to that is, my question back to that is, are there unintended consequences? You know, obviously the first thing is not to have them in the first place, but once you've got them, are there unintended consequences of trying to deal with one at the expense of other things?
Do you want me to take that as well, Tony?
Yes, please, Lisa.
I mean, it's a really good question, Sue, and this is the question we grapple with all the time in government, where we're weighing up the sort of cost-benefit ratio, if you like, of taking action against particular pests and diseases. And quite often, you know, the action we might take in government might be more damaging than the pest itself. So in trying to eradicate it, we've actually caused more environmental damage. We do have a very limited toolbox. So quite often, you know, if we're finding pests and diseases out on trees in the landscape, our only sort of method of trying to combat that is to fell the tree. So we're removing trees from the landscape. So we don't want to do that unless the pest or the pathogen is highly destructive and, you know, potentially could wipe out species and cause wide environmental damage.
Thank you, Lisa. I need to announce that the State of the UK's Woods and Trees 2025 by the Woodland Trust has been released today, so that should be interesting reading. And there's a link to it in the group chat if anyone would like to look at that. Can you see, Sue?
Yeah, there's another one. So Harry and I have been going a bit back and forth a bit because of contract growing perhaps being one of the useful solutions, but we're trying to work out how to really leverage contract growing so that it becomes the default rather than you have to argue your way through it and get that agreed. I just wondered if, well, perhaps Adam or had some thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I mean, contract growing is a fantastic solution if there's sufficient time in the process. You know, we've got about 20 acres of our nursery full of trees that are being grown specifically for contract, and some of them, one of them has got a sort of 5-year lead time, but that is absolutely exceptional. Normally, the maximum we get is sort of a 12-month lead time, and that really just isn't enough to do anything other than sort of the most basic of sort of lifting it and sort of air potting it to sort of help establishment, but nothing more than that. We get constantly frustrated with conversations that we're having with clients 3-4 years out, and we're saying, right, tell us now what you want and we can do something about it. And 3.5 years later, they come to us and say, right, yeah, we've got it all now, and it's just too late. It's well, take what we've got, or we have to buy the stock in because we haven't had enough time to grow it. So it's that lead time. You know, got that lead time, and it's absolutely fantastic, and it is a solution, but it happens too rarely.
So can I ask one other thing following on from that? So Ben was describing the RIBA work stages, and it would be absolutely wonderful if the right people were brought in from the very beginning through to the very end. I suspect that quite often some of us, architects included, are kind of dropped off at certain stages, and certainly landscape architects, so they're not actually therefore allowed to continue to be responsible to the end of the project. So do we need to educate clients to see that this is really critical if they want tree success on their projects? I mean, what's the solution that we can all come up with to sort of show how it could be different? See, Harry's put his hand over that one.
Yeah. Shall we let Harry answer that? Harry,
yeah. Whereas, in an ideal world, absolutely, it would be great to have experts involved throughout the system. To acknowledge at the same time is that we've got some people who are really highly qualified and skilled, And then there are some people who need more support and training. So I think just simply making a landscape architect more involved through the process is part of the answer, but not the only answer. I think what we really need to see is more involvement with nurseries and landscape contractors, as well as landscape architects and designers in those later stages. There are probably contractual tools that we can bring to bear on this, but it's not going to be just through the landscape architect or the designer, because the designer contractually can't tell a nursery what to do, or a landscape contractor. The instructions got to come from the person who holds the checkbook anymore.
So one of the things that I've been trying to do with Homes England, I don't know if Lee's on the call, we're trying to write a tree standard for Homes England for soft landscapes, because they reckon they're just getting far too much tree failure. And one of the things we've been trying to look at is everybody who should be engaged in a project and what they're responsible and accountable for. So it's quite interesting when you do that, because you actually suddenly think, oh, but are we going to actually persuade them that that's what they are going to be responsible and accountable for? I mean, maybe Homes England could set a standard and say they have to be, but in the general commercial run, I'm fearful that you can tell people you are responsible and accountable from the client all the way through to tree establishment, but this isn't how you're going to get it to work on the ground.
Be interested to hear Adam's perspective on this, but I think it would be very fair for a nursery to say that basically a lot of the liability is likely to end up with the nursery, and they would be very reasonably it'd be very reasonable for them to say, well, hang on, we need some support if we're going to do this, because if they carry more risk, there need to be tools that allow them, for example, through agreed substitutions and that kind of thing. So look, we've got a really good process in place to manage healthy trees. Here's one that does something really similar to what you're looking for. We can provide this rather than you going to someone who can buy the same tree but at a lower standard.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree, Harry. It's you know, that is the key. You know, the nurseries do tend to carry quite a lot of the risk and the sort of financial investment in that, and which is, you know, inevitably going to be the case. But we have too many times where we think we've got an agreement with one party, and then another party comes into the project down the supply chain and decides that doesn't suit their criteria, their budget, etc. And suddenly it all changes, and we're left holding the baby, left holding the trees that were originally specified. So, you know, it does need a very much more joined up approach right the way through the supply chain, which has always been the issue. Now, I've been involved in tree supply for 35 plus years, and that has always been the conundrum to try and resolve most of that period. But that is the answer. And when we see projects working really well, we have that collaboration, then everyone wins out of it. So it's undoubtedly a way forward if we could just get it as more common practice.
Thank you.
Saw one more turn. Oh, it's me again.
Yeah.
Simply asking all the questions. So we're aware that we all need a great deal more climate education, and in the built natural environment, we've got climate framework, we've got Teach the Future asking for climate education in schools. So everything that we can get to understand the implications of that are important. But do you think at a professional level, everybody involved, whether they're arboriculturists, landscape architects, whatever, they need to have just much more understanding in their own training courses and CPD about the importance of biosecurity? Because the problems that are potentially there go way beyond whether we lose trees or not. I mean, it's quite catastrophic to our landscape if we get plain wilt, or sorry, the new name. That's what started the Trees and Design Action Group, because somebody said, if that came here, what would we do if we lost all the plane trees in London? You know, what would be our succession plan? What would we do? So is there a role for education in this whole thing that really needs to get embedded fairly swiftly?
Tony, do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah, Dialga. I saw you come up, but no hands, so I wasn't going to bring you in. But
not showing how I could put the hand up.
yeah.
But the suggestion that I would have made in a direct experience of this is in any of the specifications for replanting or planting new trees that I draw up in a planning situation, we always specify the trees must be sourced from a reputable nursery that has a nationally recognised, implemented and auditable biosecurity policy. And that has been, you know, no ifs, ands or buts. That's what we've done. Now, a few years ago, the local authority near me was bringing forward its new local plan. And within the section on trees, they wanted to put that statement or a statement to that effect into the local plan. And the planning inspector had said, no, it's not relevant. So I think, going back to what Sue was saying about education, it's not just the arborists and people like that need to be educated. The planners need to be educated. Yeah.
Yeah. No, so, I totally agree, Dialga. And I think we are raising awareness. I think more and more people are aware of the consequences of importing trees that are infected with a pest or disease. So I think most people are aware, but we mustn't stop raising that awareness. We've got to continue it, and again across all sectors of our industry, not just planners, designers, and architects, but finance. I remember trying to influence the finance department at Kew when I was buying trees. In procurement, they wanted the cheapest. They wanted the It wasn't about stock quality, plant healthy, etc. It was about cost, and tendering was very difficult. So yeah, we need to continue raising awareness and educating everybody in our industry. Thanks, Dialga. And Ben, you got your hand up.
I was just ready to...
Oh, sorry, Dialga, carry on.
No, the point that an inspector from the planning inspectorate would regard the issue of biosecurity as irrelevant, even though it was brought forward to be an integral part of the plan. I'll shut up now.
Thank you. Thanks, Dialga. Always good to hear from you. Ben?
I think, yeah, just following on from that, the comment there, Tony, with regards to uplift of education across the board. It's surprising how little, as a landscape architect, I'm a horticulturalist, kind of, by trade really. I originally studied horticulture, but in any case, it's surprising how little horticultural education you actually get exposed to while studying landscape architecture, and considering the critical kind of piece play that we play within the biosecurity continuum, i.e., we specify these plants. We influence, what the nurseries are producing. We influence the wider landscape. We have such a big part to play, yet a considerable amount of landscape architects don't have that, real backing and underpinning knowledge of horticultural best practice and knowledge of pests and diseases. Not saying that we need to be, an encyclopedia of those, but just that base appreciation and understanding of it. It does surprise me. It does surprise me a lot, actually.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. Adam, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just really wanted to sort of emphasise a point that's made about using good nurseries that might be plant healthy accredited. That's great. Agree with all that, but it's been used a little bit too often now as a sort of a get out for, well, if I'm using a plant healthy nursery, then I can tell them to do whatever I want and get whatever trees in I want. And we have too many conversations at the moment with clients where they say, right, this is a list of the trees. We'll go back to them and say, well, actually we haven't got those trees, but we've got something really, really, really sort of similar. that's growing on our own nurseries. But if you want that specific tree, we're going to have to buy that in from abroad. But if you want this other tree that is doing exactly the same job for you, we've got it on the nursery. And just too often, no, you buy it in. Your plant healthy, so that's fine. And that just feels like that's sort of missing the point slightly. And it seems to be happening a little bit too much now, where plant health is great, fantastic, but it needs to be beyond that. You know, you need to work with the nursery to make sure that you're emphasising the importance of a sort of a UK grown tree, rather than forcing a plant health and nursery to import a tree that might not necessarily need importing.
Yeah, and I see there are quite a few landscape contractors that are coming through the plant healthy scheme now as well, not just nurseries, that will be a great influence to the industry, and hopefully raise awareness and move plant healthy forward.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it's a really encouraging sign.
Good. Well, I think we've probably come to the end. I'm just going to announce there's quite a lot of links to different websites and works in the chat. And I suppose this is a bit of a conflict of interest, really, as I'm the chair of the IDS Trees and Shrubs Online. But just to remind everyone that there's an incredible encyclopedia of trees and shrubs out there that's free to use, produced and updated by the International Dendrology Society. 730 genera and over 4,500 different species of woody plant that we're constantly updating, and it's an incredible reference that will be very useful for species selection in the future with climatic change and the increase of or the increase in threats from the various pests and diseases. So, you know, please take a look at that as well and use it. It's free and an incredible piece of work. So thank you. I'd like to thank all our speakers today, Ben, Harry, Debbie, Adam, Lisa, for great presentations, really interesting. And I think the number of people that have joined this seminar today show how important it is and the significance it plays in our industry and everything else. So thank you so much for those presentations. Thank you to everyone that's contributed on the chat line as well. Sue, I think, do we print off the chat line and send it to delegates?
So I'll add your link to the IDS on the chat. What I do with the chat is I go through it and try and make a bit of sense of it and make sure the references are there. And then that goes as a PDF, which will be on the website. So the key is the website. Under past events, this whole, the recording, this presentations, the chat, and will all be sort of there in one piece, plus our newsletter, which will be at the front end of the website. So and I think Dee will send that out to everybody anyway as well. So it's not lost. In fact, I shall save it right now to make sure it isn't. Right, so thank you, Tony, very much for that and for chairing in your superb way as ever. Dee's put in the chat our next seminar, which is tackling another tricky problem, which is integrating trees and utilities. So we don't shy from these things. But the other thing is that on the 4th of November, we're going to run a slightly different seminar, which is actually focusing on growing a resilient research base for urban trees. And Cecil Konizhny, with the unpronounceable surname, is going to give us a sort of talk about why he thinks research is so important. But we're also going to put out a call to people who are newly in their research careers. They don't have to be actually young, but they're young researchers, if you see what I mean, to ask them what projects they've got and, you know, either in process or just completed. And the Mersey Foresters very kindly put up a small sponsorship amount. So we'll select, if we get enough calls of responses, we'll select 6 who'll then give a short presentation. And then the audience who attends that seminar will be able to choose the top 3, and the winner will get £500, and the 2 runners-up will get £250 each. So, hey, that's an incentive to think what you're working with. So that will be on the 4th of March. We'll put out the call for research projects pretty quickly and ask for submissions by the 10th of October. And then we'll let everybody know by the 24th whether they're going to be asked to give a short presentation or not. So that will be in the newsletter, and we'll also send it out to everybody. Emma, was there anything else I was meant to add here?
No, I don't think so. It's just about you feeding into ongoing research.
Yeah. So we can close the formal meeting. Emma and I'll hang around for a few minutes in case anybody had any other business they wanted to raise or some suggestion of something they think we should do. And otherwise, we'll thank you all and hope to see you again next time.